talked about a lot, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you would like parents or caregivers or educators to take away from this conversation.
Well, I think there's a meaningfulness to these stories. They must really touch people very deeply, because another example that I wanted to mention was that there's a story called Neem the Half-Boy. This book really could be read at any age group. The Neem the Half-Boy is something we usually use about third grade and up. And I happened to be working in a prison school in San Bernardino, California. And it was a juvenile prison school. And we give the books to the kids. And I can't know their names. I can't know why they're there. And the kids will have the books in front of them. But so as not to embarrass them, these are 16 and 17-year-old boys or girls. I usually say, if you prefer not to listen to me read aloud, you can just look at the pages yourself and, read the book. But they would just all turn to me like they looked like 3-year-olds, just that they'd never been read aloud to. And the story is about a king and queen who want to have a son, but they don't really know how to go about it. And so they ask all the fairies around them, and they ask all the creatures around them, and nobody knows. And so they sent the fairies off to Arif the wise man and to ask him how they can have a son. And Arif tells them that to tell the queen that she needs to eat an apple. And if she eats the apple, she will have a boy. So she's delighted to have that information, and she starts to eat the apple. She gets halfway through the apple and she gets distracted. And she leaves the apple and she goes away. She only has a half boy, and he's got one eye and one arm and one leg and one half a body. And he grows up and he's quite happy. He hops along and he rides on a horse if it's too difficult for him to walk. But at some point he decides, I think I want to become whole. I feel like becoming whole. So he asks his parents how he can become a whole boy, and they don't really know. And so they send the fairies back to ask Arif, and Arif tells them, it's too late for the queen to eat the other half of an apple. It's probably gotten rotten by now, but there's a dragon in a cave, and he's got some medicine. And if Neem, that's his name, if Neem goes and gets the medicine from the back of the cave and drinks it, he can become whole. The fairies go back and they kind of miss the message a little. They tell Neem he has to drive the dragon out, which is not exactly what Arif said. And so he goes to the dragon and calls out to him. And he says, I have to drive you out. And he says, well, why do you have to drive me out? Well, because you've got medicine in the back of your cave and I need to drink it so I can become a whole boy. He says, well, I'll give you the medicine. The reason I'm breathing fire on everybody is I don't have a stove to cook on. And so if I had a stove, then I wouldn't have to breathe fire and bother everybody. So Neem says, well, I'll bring you the stove. Well, I'll give you the medicine first. So he gives him the medicine and he goes off, and then he brings him back the stove and stops breathing fire, and everybody lives happily ever after. So I read the story to the boys, and I had them do a little activity, and I had them draw themselves as half. And they draw a picture of themselves as half and fold the paper in half. And I said, okay, now open up the paper and draw yourself as whole. And what is it that makes you only feel like half a person right now? And what is it that would make you feel whole? And can you write a paragraph about that? And so they did. And I said, would you be willing to share it with the rest of the kids? And some of them raised their hands and said they would, and we had them read them. And one boy didn't feel comfortable reading it himself. He asked the librarian, who was his teacher, if she would read it. And she read it. And in it, he says that he was living at home with his parents. The house was very chaotic, and there was drugs and alcohol. He was just really unhappy there. And he left and he went to live with his grandmother. And his parents didn't even come looking for him. And because of some trouble he'd gotten into, he'd ended up here in this prison school. And he wasn't sure if he'd made the right decision. But the other boys just clapped for him and just were so proud that he had shared this. I was really deeply felt for his being so honest about everything. And I couldn't know anything really about what had happened. And I went home. I went back to Connecticut where I was living. And the very next day, I got an email from the librarian. She said, "You're not going to believe what happened." That same boy came into me this morning with poetry books that he'd been writing for years and had never shared with anybody. These stories deeply affect us.
What incredible ways you as a person, your work and Hoopoe books have impacted the lives of other people. It's just inspiring to be a witness to these stories.
They're amazing.
At the bottom of your emails, you have a quote. And it says, from thinking children come thinking adults. What is it about that quote that makes you want to share that on a daily basis with other people?
I was a civil rights teenager in the 50s and 60s, and I feel education is really where we make the biggest difference. Teaching children to think and to help them consciously evolve the way we are all trying to consciously evolve is really my life's work. And I'm hoping more and more people become really engaged with these stories, because they are one of the ways we can really help children, elevate our expectations of what they're capable of. And then we learn too,
Yes, that sort of full circle back to the Reggio thinking is that we learn together as adults and children. And when we believe that children are intelligent and we can learn side by side, we create a caring, more empathetic, more intelligent world and society.
They come with an awareness that they haven't lost yet. They come with an awakenedness that we need to keep nurturing. I think that the stories just are such a magical way to connect with children. It's not didactic. You're not doing things in a scolding way or a demanding way. It's very natural to do this kind of teaching. And I think it's something that we're getting from the East to a large extent. I mean, there's so much interest in Eastern religions and Eastern ways of doing things. As Westerners, we offer all this scientific knowledge and awareness, but we have to merge this with this other way of seeing to develop as full human beings.
Adding the layers of perspective and complexity to move forward.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking your time and for sharing your knowledge, your experience. What amazing work you're doing with children, adults. Thank you for this chance to learn a little about that and to be inspired by you.
Well, thank you. I love that you're doing this too, because it's wonderful.